So the grid is very helpful because our eyes deceive us. Because we know this is a reflection, we're going to tend to think of it as being half of the picture, where in fact it's foreshortened. And so while the sky at the top here is a full 1, 2, 3 and a half sections of our height, which is a total of 7, this water reflection here is only 1.5. And you can see where it's foreshortened because this band that's almost 1 grid width or 1 inch wide going across here, down here, it's not even 1/2 inch wide. So it's less than 1/2 inch. And we'll tend to just sort of make it half scale down there, but you could go with closer to 1/3 scale. And so that's why this grid is very helpful to show you what's really going on in your picture, because we'll tend to think what we think is there is actually there, and then things won't look quite right. And so we're going to make our sky about half of the picture. So to do this, I've gone ahead and drawn my box that's 7 by 10 inches, and it's where my picture goes in my border. And then I've extended hash marks at about every inch so that as I'm laying out, I can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to do this one upside down when I lay out. When we do the big one, I'll have you looking at it right side up. But I think it's helpful for you to just think of these as shapes and not so much focus on what they are. It's when we think about what they actually are that our brain tells us how big things are. And it can do so incorrectly. And I did use Sharpie on this because even though it's bleeding a little on my batting, it's permanent. It's not going to bleed through my layers when I go to wash out. Some inks will wash out really well. Some will just sort of bleed through and need extra work to get them out, even though they're washable. So I'm using Sharpie for this. So this is an example of a very nice sky fabric that is currently available on the market. And this is a Timeless Treasures one. And you can see that you have a lot of options for what you might want to put into a quilt that you're doing. You could make a bigger quilt using this than what we're doing on the mini, but you might have a very overly busy sky with too many little sunbursts and things. So you might just use a part of this in your quilt and then make some of the rest of it just blue. So on this quilt, I am going to use the commercial sky fabric. And so what I've done here, I've isolated a repeat in my pattern that I want to use, and one's a little smaller because it needs to appear foreshortened, and then I can flip this over and you can see how nicely it'll create a reflection. Now this is a 1-to-1 ratio, and so we're going to have to fudge it a little bit in order to make this appear foreshortened in our water. And so to place these, I'm going to make sure I have a nice generous overlap at the top. I want this to overlap by at least 1/2 inch at the top. And I don't need as much overlap at the bottom, but I do need this pretty low, so I'm going to have it go off the bottom at least 1/2 inch. And when you're raw edge appliquing, you do want some overlap, and your pieces have to be a little oversized because you really can't free motion quilt right up to your margin without there being bad stuff going on that's hard to control. So you really want to have at least a 1/2 inch margin so you're not quilting too close to the edge. So if you look at my far shore on this picture, this part here is really less than 2 inches. And this part through here, even if you count the tops of the trees, which I'm not really planning to have the trees themselves be that much of the fabric, but maybe this really thick solid part to here, we've still got only 1, 2, less than 3 inches. So if I do 3 inches plus 1/2 inch margin on either side, I really only need a 4-inch piece. And I'm not going to make it exactly like what's back there. I'm just going to give that impression. And so I'm going to use my black fairy frost. And I did just want to mention that all my fabrics that I'm laying out here are selvage to selvage. So this is the weft direction of my fabric. And it's the way that your fabric tends to stretch. This way it doesn't stretch as much. And the reason we're going to do them all the same is that it will help us control things as we're going on. So this piece here for the narrow areas is really just a little more than 2 inches. And I just cut it by folding it like this and just sort of cutting it with my scissors and freehanding it. And my thick part here is a little under 4 inches. So, and then I don't want to place it up too high. It really needs to go pretty low. And so when we stitch around this, we're just going to have a little bit of this stuff and a little bit of this radiance here. And then we'll have much more in the sky. Our sky will end up being half the size of our quilt if we place it like that. And then the bottom band is really 1/2 inch. If I add 1 inch, it's 1.5 inches. I'm making it sort of almost 2 inches, overlapping it off the bottom by 1/2 or so. That gives me, you can see these already, they meet. They won't when they're stitched, but they meet right now. So this is really quite a bit larger than it needs to be. And so it overlaps quite a bit on the bottom. And this just allows me to do more of a wavy line of some sort if I wanted, instead of just straight across. So, but I do want this basted. And so I'm going to show you with this project. This is Superior Threads Vanish Extra. It's a wash away thread. And I'm going to hand baste 3 lines on this. I'm just going to do this as quickly as I can. And I wanted to take a sec to explain why I'm not going to glue this down with fabric glue stick or use fusibles or anything like that. You certainly could do that. What I've found, 2 things. One, gluing this with a glue stick is great. You start quilting and then the glue starts breaking off and you have a lot of loose pieces that you have to deal with. And it's almost like a crutch that once it's gone, it's harder to deal with it, and it does take time to glue all that and let it dry, and then you're always buying glue sticks. And so what I've started doing many years ago is I just baste. And then for the fusible, I really don't want the stiffness that adds to it, and I like the more organic, sort of happy accident way of doing it the way that I'm showing you. So whenever I can, I like to use chalk to mark with, because it does wash out, and you can even brush it out with your nail brush, with your REA nail brush. So there is the start of my piece. There are some activities for this lesson. Please check them out. Thanks.